And we're live. I see the little red recording button to help people out. Thank you everyone for joining today. The way these kind of presentations work, I think it's kind of boring if I just go through nothing but a presentation. So I'll try to get through that part as fast as possible. I'll pause, see what kind of questions people have. Then I'm going to run some scenarios through our tools that we have and maybe show you some kind of real world examples. And then at the end, I'll just open it up for questions and then we'll hang out for however long we have, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and y'all tell me if you can see this. Can everyone see this? Looks good.
Yep.
So I'm going to go ahead and present here. Ellie, I guess I'll rely on you to be my technical person. Okay. If something goes blank, just let me know. So 5 common dental school loan mistakes is what I kind of frame the talk of today. And is this for me? It's for you if you have more than $100,000 of debt or you have a friend that has that. So that's basically everybody, right? Because either you're going to get something out of this personally or you're going to be able to help out a friend or a colleague who could really be in some serious distress over their debt. So just a little bit about me real quick, very briefly, just so you know I'm not some, jokester or something that doesn't know what I'm talking about. So I've advised about $250 million in dental school debt, about 600 clients. I'm the founder of studentloanplanner.com, which is one of the largest, I guess it's the largest student loan advisory group in the country now. I'm going to use a calculator to model some things. If y'all want that calculator, just go to studentloanplanner.com/download and you can actually get your own copy. And maybe in the chat, since this is Zoom here, let's see in the chat. Let's see, I might have to stop screen sharing. Maybe actually in the chat, what's your biggest frustration with student loans? And it looks like I'm getting a little bit of an echo. So everybody just try to make sure you're muted. Let's put this in the chat. What is your biggest frustration with student loans? And then Allie, if you could just read a couple of the ones that you see.
Okay, finding the lowest interest rates,
Yeah, the high interest level.
too much reading through long chunks of legal text, lack of discussion of it by any of the schools.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Trying to figure out if I am making the right moves in managing my money, savings versus paying off the debt.
Yeah, totally makes sense. So those are some good ones. Now let me before I reveal those things here, I thought just for fun that I would look at the cost of Columbia Dental School, right? So this is for the 2020 school year. So and can you, Alec, can you make sure everyone's on mute? I'm still getting quite a bit of feedback, if that's possible. So 122,000 a year, right? So what does the college not really tell you? I mean, one thing is the tuition doesn't really ever stay flat like this. So this tuition is going to increase, right? You generally, 3 to 5% a year. The other big things that they don't talk about is, and this is all dental schools, by the way, this is all graduate schools, period. So this is not like a Columbia thing. They also don't talk about the origination fees and the accrued interest. So when I'm predicting how much somebody's going to graduate, dental school with and student loans, and it's somebody that has, literally zero financial support, I'm going to take their cost of attendance from the school. So it's about 122,000 or so. And I'm going to say 122,000, and then I'm going to times it by 4. And then from my experience, what you have to do is you have to multiply this by about 1.25. That accounts for a couple big things: the origination fees, the accrued interest, and then the tuition inflation. So y'all might have less than this for various reasons, like family support, discounted tuition, perhaps merit scholarships, whatever. But this is kind of like, this is a normal dental school debt these days, especially in a big city. So if you have anywhere close to that, don't feel any shame over it. It's pretty common, believe it or not. So these five tips that we'll talk about. First thing you should not do. I know a couple people mentioned their interest rate, but you should not refinance your student loans just because you think you need to pay your debt off. This is not a Susie Orman, Dave Ramsey type of problem. And the simple reason why it's not is because to pay this off, you'd have to pay $60,000. There's actually more like $70,000 a year over 10 years. And if you did that, you'd be living on $20,000 a year of after-tax income if you make the average associate income. So that's just not a great way to live life, because you're not going to be able to start a family, start a practice, live your best life if you only focus on your loans. So that's one thing I want to be clear, is you probably shouldn't just focus on your student loans. The other thing is if you only have $100,000 of dental school debt, then yeah, you probably should pay it back. Right now, there's the CARES Act interest freeze going on. I expect that they will probably extend that period of zero interest for you all. So that's probably a great reason not to refinance, but some people should refinance. It's just not most dental students, believe it or not. Most dental students actually these days are going for forgiveness. The second thing I've got for you is you should not avoid ownership because of fear of student loans. So can't tell you how many times I hear people say, I can't buy a $500,000 dental practice when I have $500,000 of debt. And in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. And the main reason for that is because most of your student loans are going to be like a tax. Basically, instead of paying $5,000 a month, what most of you are going to do is use something like pay-as-you-earn or revised pay-as-you-earn and pay 10% of your income. And if you're paying a tax, the best way to reduce that tax is to become an owner, because that gives you more control over your income and allows you to reduce your taxable income, which is going to make you a lot wealthier long term. So for goodness sakes, don't avoid ownership just because of your student loans. My third common mistake that people can make is not having perfect information about forgiveness. So a couple loopholes that I'll mention later, but basically how you file your taxes matters. If you're married or getting married, then you can include your spouse or exclude your spouse from your loan repayment just by having a couple, knowledge basically of how to file taxes. So you want to make sure you're fully informed about forgiveness so that you don't make any mistakes. Now, this fourth mistake, common dental school mistake, is to use any one of the following plans. So IBR, ICR, extended, standard, graduated, none of these plans are really that helpful. It's really pay-as-you-earn and revised pay-as-you-earn are the two I see most commonly. And if you do anything besides one of these two repayment strategies, you're going to cost yourself a ton of money. So the first strategy is very passive, paying as little as possible. And then the other strategy is super aggressive, paying as much as possible. Most people need to do the super passive route. If you do anything besides the super passive route, then that could be, you could really make a big mistake if you jump right into it, paying it all off without really being really aware of what you're committing yourself to. So worst case scenario, I'm going to talk about this a lot. Worst case scenario, your student loans are a tax. So one thing I like to joke about is, what's the difference between Germans and Americans? So, besides our insanely high levels of COVID in America, the one big difference is Germans pay more taxes than we do. And then they get free education, right? Or at least a very discounted education. So that's kind of a thing that really, and I'm getting a little echo here. That's the thing that matters, because if your student loans are basically more like an income tax, then you're kind of like a German dentist with no debt. And so your student loans should not scare you that much. I'll show you more about this in a second. And if the idea of paying your student loans like a tax with basically going for forgiveness, if that's not attractive, then you can pay it off and refinance. So imagine if, Jeff Bezos had the option of, instead of paying 10% towards loans or something, that he could just pay $5,000 a month. Well, of course he would pay $5,000 a month, because that's a lot cheaper, right? So 5 quick tips. And then I'm going to do 5 quick loopholes, and then I'm going to pause and see what kind of questions you have in the chat before I do some examples. Okay. So 5 quick tips. Beware of paying back your debt when you really shouldn't. That means don't try to pay it off when you should be going for forgiveness. 2 is pursue all the life goals and dreams that you want to. I've done, again, 600 consultations personally with dentists, probably actually 700 if you include specialists. And I've never seen a case where somebody can't pursue their life goals and dreams because of their student loan debt. I've had several individuals with $1 million in student loan debt. I've had couples with close to 2 million. I've never seen somebody who can't pursue their life goals and dreams, even though the student debt, in this country in general is just ridiculous. So that's great news, that the student debt does not have to hold you back. And I can show you the math why that is. We can get into more details on that in a little bit. Number 3 is you got to be real careful about spending, specifically on houses and cars. usually the houses and the car spending is really what's going to torpedo your finances even more than your student loans. You might not believe me, but I promise you, again, I've done, $250 million of dental student loan planning. It's really the houses and the cars, because we can always figure out the student loans because the rules are super complicated. So if you know all the loopholes, then you can really minimize the impact on your life, right? But the houses and the cars, that's a monthly payment. You're not getting out of it. You care about your credit because you want to be able to, buy a practice or be involved in a partnership maybe in the future. So dentists really never want to default or walk away from their house or their car, because it'll wreck your credit, and then you have to wait maybe 7 years to get into a practice or partnership again, right? So that's really a dangerous thing. So just be real careful with that. And then honestly, I've never seen anybody whose finances have been hurt really by traveling or small expenditures like getting your daily latte. That's totally fine. So it's really those two things. Now, number 4 is avoid the wrong repayment plans. Don't choose the wrong repayment plan. And, a lot of what we do is figuring out whether somebody should be refinancing and paying their loans back, or doing pay as you earn to try to pay as little as possible, maybe filing their taxes a certain way, or using the revised pay as you earn to try to get interest subsidies on their loans to not have to pay back as big of a balance when they become practice owners. And then the 5th one is pay as much as possible or as little as possible on your loans. Now, before I just pause, this next slide is just going to be me pausing for questions. I just thought I'd mention, I haven't done this before. I thought I'd mention 5 loopholes that most dentists aren't aware of. So a lot of times, the exit counseling will be as detailed as saying, consolidate and sign up for repay. That's probably the most common result of exit counseling. It usually takes like 30 minutes. You're not going to get a lot of detailed information from really any financial aid department in the country, from my experience. Maybe a couple of them do a decent job, but the vast majority are there just to basically make sure you get the loans and the school gets paid, right? And then anything else they do is really out of the goodness of their heart, because they're not necessarily rewarded for that. So 5 loopholes that I see, and I put in parentheses when I see these come up, just so people, if you're watching this, can kind of be aware that there might be some loopholes that you really might not be aware of, okay? So the first one is the community property loophole. That's for most people that live in the Southwest or the West Coast. So I know that, Columbia University, right, East Coast, New York, but some of you might want to be moving to California or Texas or Washington State or something like that. If you're planning on moving out in that direction, there's some really unique rules about community property law that influences how much you have to pay on your student loans. It makes a big difference. I've seen some people have to pay $20,000 less a year because of community property rules in some cases if they're married. Wanted to make you aware of that. Similarly, and you'll notice a lot of these loopholes happen when someone gets married. The second one is the double debt loophole. So this is when one spouse has a lot bigger debt, and that's, again, it's not really that relevant if you're single, but if you do get married and you have wildly different debt sizes, that makes a big difference in how much you have to pay. The third one is the interest subsidy loophole. So this is just basically a way to get your interest subsidized at a faster rate to get more of your loan interest paid for by the government. That's basically the repay plan is what you do for that, but you can consolidate and be a little bit more careful about, when you leave that program to get the maximum subsidy. The fourth is marriage tax. So you can file separately or jointly and minimize your payment that way. And the fifth one is if you're recertifying your income-based payment, if you're paying your loans based on your income, then your income can sometimes go up or down suddenly. And if you know the rules about how to certify, that you can get the most advantageous, payment as a low percentage of your income. So I just spoke, a totally foreign language to probably most people. So I'm going to pause for a second and let's just see at really basic level, what are some of the people's questions, if post them in the chat. And then the next one we're going to do is some examples, but I just wanted to see what kind of, and if you're just like, oh my gosh, this is a fire hose of information, that's the most common, people's reaction. So let me know if I need to explain some of those more basic terms like income driven, pay as you earn, revised pay as you earn. If I need to explain that, that's probably a good thing for me to know too. Okay, what do you mean by recertification? So when you sign up for paying your loans, you're gonna have to sign up for a repayment plan, right? Now, most people straight out of school are not going to be able to pay on the default payment plan, which is the standard 10-year plan. So the standard 10-year plan, which is the default plan if you don't do anything, that's 1% of your balance every month. So if you have $500,000 of student loans, they're going to ask you to pay $5,000 a month unless you decide to pay based on your income. So then when they ask you to pay based on your income, they're going to want documents to prove that you're making what you say you make, right? So that's one of the advantages of knowing the rules. Is what you can do as a fresh grad is consolidate your student loans into a direct consolidation loan, and then you can sign up with a $0 income. And that gives you $0 payments for an entire 12 months. And then every year thereafter, they're going to ask you for proof of income. That's, for most people, going to be your tax returns. So if you know about the rules about when to submit your tax returns and when to submit a pay stub, for example, and when you are allowed to do that, that you can minimize what you have to pay. How can we learn more about these loopholes? I have a resources thing at the very end. But the Student Loan Planner podcast, we have whole episodes about some of these loopholes. So if you're a podcast person, I know people don't go to the gym anymore. That's kind of a thing of the past. But maybe you go on runs where you are. I don't know. But you can listen to a lot of those podcasts. Again, like Student Loan Planner podcast on Spotify, iTunes. We cover a lot of those. And also our Student Loan Planner blog, we have articles about them. If you just go to the blog and click the little search icon in the top right, then you can read about articles about these. Do most people who apply for forgiveness get approved? The answer is yes, because you don't really have to apply for it. This is forgiveness for the people in the private sector. There's another version called public service loan forgiveness, and that's for people that work at a not-for-profit or government employment for 10 years, and then the forgiveness is tax-free. For all dentists in the private sector, you can get forgiveness by simply doing it for 20 years, and then you have to pay income taxes on the forgiven balance. So that's a forgiveness basically that's available to everyone. So you don't have to apply for it. Podcast, I allude to politics of student loans. So how do I prepare clients to afford the tax bomb? So in other words, if you have $400,000 of dental school debt from Columbia, a lot of people think that that's just going to soar. If you're paying based on your income, you're paying a small amount. So student loans actually grow at a lot slower rate than you would think, because student loan interest is simple interest and most other kinds of interest are compounded interest. That's because it's a government program. So the student loan interest generally doubles every 20 years. And it's worse, the very worst, at the very beginning. So a $400,000 balance would probably end up at about $800,000 after 20 years. And then you would have to pay federal, state, local income tax on that $800,000. So to answer you how I'd prepare clients for that, you can translate that into a percentage of your income that needs to be invested into a Vanguard, Fidelity, Schwab, Robinhood, Betterment type of account. So you can translate that to a percentage of your income, say it's 5% that you need to put into mutual funds, and then you can project out that there's a high likelihood that you'll have enough to pay that tax bomb with. And so if you say that you have to pay 5% of your income towards the tax bomb and maybe 10% towards your student loans, 5 plus 10 is 15%. So then what I'll tell somebody is your student loans are either a 15% income tax for 20 years if they have a tax bomb, or if they eliminate the tax bomb with legislation, then it's a 10% tax bomb, 10% tax on your income, which is a better deal. And it's kind of like getting a tax cut almost. What are thoughts on, and I'll come back to these in a little bit here. What are thoughts on trying to work part-time during dental school? I would say don't do it. I mean, if you want to do it, fine. But, you're paying, this exorbitant amount of money for your education. I would take advantage of that. Again, the long-term, your student loans are a tax or a debt, right? So the thing is you either want to try to keep it as low as possible because you are paying it off, or to be honest, with the rules that the government currently has, it incentivizes you to spend like there's no tomorrow. Because again, if your debt's going to be forgiven, what's the difference between $400,000 and $800,000? I mean, it's the difference in the tax bomb, right? But realistically, Congress is going to have to collect all these, IRS is going to have to collect all these taxes for millions of people. What is the chance that the IRS is going to tell people who have most of their savings in their practice, in their house, and in their retirement that you have to empty one of those to pay us an income tax bomb? I don't think that's a very high probability, which is why I think that there's going to be a political solution with the tax bomb forgiveness. Dentists using PSLF, and so that doesn't really happen that often from my experience, simply because most dentists that do public dentistry Public health dentistry, they burn out just because it's kind of like you're doing a huge number of procedures, and you do it for a few years, and it really gets very, very difficult on your body to do that many procedures, I think. So some people, are working towards it, but I would say maybe fewer than 5% of the dentists I talk to. When I say refinance a loan, what I mean is you can sell your loan to a private lender. So just as an example here, so on our site, basically we have one of the ways we make money is through partnerships with refinancing companies. So, these are a list of different refinancing companies that you can apply to see if you can get your interest rate down from, say, 7 or 6% down to, 4 or 5%. But the problem is one, the CARES Act is giving you 0% interest until September 30th. There's negotiations right now that I'm following really, really closely that, will determine the next stimulus bill. That'll probably be extended. So, but, a lot of people think, well, I need to get my interest rate lower by refinancing. Yeah. Well, you can do that. But it's generally not a good idea if you need to go for forgiveness. And let me look at the present button here, and we'll look at a couple more. And let's see, I think I might have lost the chat. Well, I'll come back to those in a bit, okay? So first off, I wanted to show an example here. So we'll say a graduating dentist wants to get a job in San Francisco, okay? And they have $500,000 of student loan debt, and let's say that they're married and the spouse has no income. So this is going to show you that community property loophole, this number one loophole for the West Coast, right? They're moving to San Francisco, which is in California. Okay, so just to show you how my calculator works, I'm going to zoom in here so you can maybe see a little bit better. So what we're going to do
You can't see your calculator.
Oh, can't see it? Really? And maybe if I stop share and then I'm going to do this. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. All right. So we'll say, I'm going to zoom in here. Okay. So I'm going to say 500,000 in debt. We'll say 6% interest. And we'll say family size of 2. And here is the income for each of them. I'm going to say 0 for the spouse. And then what happens when you graduate is you make $0 the prior year, right? So that's, if you know how to do this, then you can sort of, the prior year, you can sort of get this $0 income that gives you $0 payments for the first 12 months, even regardless of what they do with the stimulus bill. And then the following year you work, you're going to have, some people do residencies, right? In New York, everybody has to do, I think, a GPR. But, a lot of people that go become an associate, maybe they make, let's say you make $140,000 a year. Well, you're going to make that for half of the year in the first year, right? And then the next year you'll make, your full income for the entire year. And then let's say this person really is a hustler and they make, we're going to assume that this person sort of tops out. We'll go even higher than that. We'll say this person ends up making $250,000, which is, certainly well above average for the typical dentist, right? So if I do this community property loophole, what you can do is split the person's income down the middle. So if you file taxes separately, and this is really complicated, so I started with a really complicated example. So if I make them easier, right, it'll be a little more relaxing. That's my strategy. So if we split this income down the middle with our tax filing status and we file separately, what's going to happen is when they're certifying your payments, they're going to look at just your income instead of both spousal incomes. And then they're only going to look at really half your household income because of the fact that you live in California. That's not something that applies if you're in New York. But what does that do for you? What it does is this pay-as-you-earn column is what I'm going to highlight. And what you can see is the payments are $0 to $1,000 a month versus $0 to $2,400 a month. So if someone's just going with the repay plan blindly, pretty soon after they graduate, you're talking about a difference between of $1,000 a month versus $400 a month. That's a big difference. That's $600 a month difference. That's $7,000 a year more that you're paying on your student loans just because you didn't know that you could use a different strategy because you're living in a state with community property law. So that's just one example of kind of a weird scenario. Now, in terms of what you would owe, your $500,000 becomes about $935,000 over 20 years. So in 2040, your $900,000 is forgiven and you have to pay income taxes. So kind of one way to look at this is I'm going to highlight these two. So let's say you could get a 4% interest rate for 20 years. You'd pay with this refinancing deal here. That's meaning you sell your loan to a private bank. You would pay $727,000 of principal and interest. If I look at the pay-as-you-earn plan here, you would pay $164,000. Now remember, you have $500,000 in debt. So if you're able to pay $164,000 over 20 years, that's a huge win. Now you have the remaining balance we saw of about $935,000, and the taxes due on this are $374,000. Now recall that I think this tax bomb could potentially be going away. If it's not, remember I said that you needed to save a specific dollar amount into investments. So in this case, you would need to save about $1,000 a month into a mutual fund account for 20 years to have enough for this tax bomb. So if essentially take $1,000 and add it to this column, and that's the total cash flow that you would have to pay for your student loans. The $1,000 would go into an account that's yours, that if you didn't end up needing it, you would get to keep it. And then the payments would be something that you would be trying to minimize. Now, realistically, what I think will happen with either a future administration that's Democratic or a moderate Republican administration at some point would be that the taxes would go away for student loan forgiveness. So if that were to happen, watch what happens to the tax bomb. You just put in 0 and 0, and then the tax bomb would go to 0 because you would not have to pay anything because they would forgive student loans tax-free. And if that happened, then the total payments would just simply be $164,000 over 20 years versus $727,000. Now, if you had just listened to, the advice that you'll get if you call into the student loan servicer, they're going to pretty much always tell you to sign up for the repay plan. There's some situations where it's the right plan, but they're going to blindly tell you, sign up for this plan. And if you had done that, then you would be paying approximately $400,000 more over 25 years than you would have paid on the pay-as-you-earn plan. So that's just one example of how somebody can literally lose a house by not having a knowledge about the student loan rules. Unfortunately, that's because they're extremely complicated, because every time a new set of student loan rules comes out, they never seem to eliminate the old rules. They just sort of create a new set of rules that they layer on top of it. So that's why I kind of call it, our student loan policy in America is kind of like a sandwich. It's like a student loan sandwich where, the rules of the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s are just sort of layered on top of each other until we have, 15 different repayment plans, a lot of which are irrelevant, but you wouldn't know that if you're staring at the list of all the different options you can choose from. So I'm going to set this back to the original sort of tax bomb assumption. And now I will look at a different example. So I will share my screen here. So we will look at two more examples. One of them is a dentist that's getting a job in New Jersey, $350,000 of debt. This person's single. And we'll look at somebody who has $200,000 of debt, maybe because family assistance or something like that, wants to pay it off rapidly while living in New York City. So I will share again. Okay, so in this scenario, we're going to say this person is single. So I'm going to say single, $350,000 of debt, and I will take away this column. And then same story. So we'll say Jersey. So, probably average incomes I've seen in Jersey, probably $130,000 or something like that for an associate. And then we'll assume this person, gets super, super successful, and we'll assume that they also top out at $250,000. Now, keep in mind, if your income is lower than this, then it makes forgiveness look even better. Because if your income's lower, your income-based payments are lower, and you're getting more forgiven. So I could model this at an even higher rate of growth, I suppose. I could say, assume the person's income tops out at $350,000. So this person would end up being sort of a superstar general dentist here in Jersey with that kind of income. So if I look at the payments, the repay plan and the pay plan in this case would have basically the exact same monthly payments. And with the pay as you earn plan, the balance would get partially paid down over 20 years. With the repay plan, it would get completely paid down over 25 years, meaning that there would be nothing left to forgive on this repay plan. Okay. So if we're trying to figure out which plan makes more sense, so if I look at these different plans, what the thing that can be confusing is sometimes these are forgiven over all different numbers of years. So you could refinance it to a 10-year term and then it's done in 2030, right? You could do it with the pay as you earn plan and then it's a 20-year term, and then this repay plan, it's 25 years, but in this case you pay the whole thing off after only 23 years. So which plan should you choose? I look at this column here. This column basically says, what is the cost in today's dollars? So if the cost is, the lowest amount possible in today's dollars, that's the plan that I would typically go with. So if I'm looking at this column, the problem with this case is this person doesn't have, a clear option, because basically you're seeing this 340,000. Well, that's pretty close to the option of refinancing and just paying it off, paying $3,500 a month. So this person could really go either way. So what I would kind of tell this person is, well, first off, what if they eliminate the taxes on student loan forgiveness? So let's say that they eliminate the taxes on student loan forgiveness. Well, now my relative measure, this is basically saying like, what is the cost in today's dollars? So it's like $20 in today's dollars. How much does it cost you? So the difference, is about $40,000. So in that case, the pay as you earn plan would probably be a better option to gamble on, because you're going to be able to pay less if they eliminate the tax bomb. Now, the other thing that I would say is, remember that your payments are always based off of your taxable income. So with this person in particular, you could probably reduce the person's taxable income pretty aggressively by just being aware of things like 401ks and depreciation, which is just writing off, your purchases for your practice. Things like deductions for various kinds of, maybe you're doing CE, maybe you're doing business travel, whatever it is, you're working with your accountant to try to get that taxable income much lower. So what I would simply model is, let's say that this person puts away, let's say $30,000 for retirement. Well, that would reduce this person's taxable income, which means that basically your income is a lot lower than it would otherwise be. And what that does is get you more forgiven. So, the tax bomb previously was $80,000. Now it's $120,000. The reason why it's more is because the payments went down quite a lot, because I lowered that person's taxable income to get them to pay less. Now, remember earlier I said student loans were like a tax. So if this person needed to save for this $120,000 tax bomb, this person would only need to save about $300 a month, which $300 a month, that's pretty modest, really, right? $300 a month. That's equivalent to about 2% of your income, basically. I'm going to highlight this in a color that is easily seen. So that's about 2% of your income. So that's what you have to save, for your tax bomb. Now, your required payment is about 8% of your income, because of this careful tax planning that we did that reduced your taxable income. So instead of pay as you earn is usually 10% of your income, now it's 8% of your income, because you can lower that taxable income by careful tax planning. So what that means is your student loans in this case are a 10% income tax, 8 plus 2. It's 10% income tax if no changes happen. And then if they eliminate the tax bomb, then it's just an 8% income tax for 20 years if there's elimination of the tax bomb. Now, Biden has a student loan plan. Biden wants to cut student loan payments from 10% of income to 5%. So if he does that, then this $460,000 would get cut in half. And then now we at least have a pretty strong argument for this dentist to be really cautious about refinancing, because this person could end up paying a lot less money. Now, if I ran these same numbers with just a student loan balance of, say, $200,000 instead of $350,000, then the math gets a little bit more clear. Okay. So what I'm noticing now is, if I look at refinancing relatively, so I see nothing forgiven here. I see nothing forgiven because the person pays the thing off in full. They pay the loans off in full because their income is too high. Because why is that? It's because their required payments under either one of these income-based plans are high enough that you're essentially paying the loan off in full and you're not getting any forgiveness. So all you're doing is paying at a 6% interest rate and getting nothing to forgive. And that's not a scenario where we want to have that happen. So if this person's living in New York City, this person could commit to a $2,000 a month payment fine. Like that wouldn't be the end of the world. However, what I would probably counsel the person to do, and this goes back to another one of the loopholes I mentioned, this is this interest subsidy loophole. So if I can get this person's payment to be $0 a month and then $400 a month based off of their first two taxable incomes being very low, then what does that do? That gets me a low payment that the revised pay-as-you-earn plan then goes to work and gets you interest subsidies that give you an interest cost that's even lower than perhaps if you had refinanced. So for example, if you look at this column, the repay plan, the interest cost is $6,000 and $8,200. That's in comparison to its $12,000 if you're just paying the normal kind of pay-as-you-earn plan, and it's even cheaper really than the private refinancing's first year interest charge of $8,000 without having to commit to that giant payment. So for this person living in New York City, what I would tell the person is take advantage of this loophole and consolidate and get on the repay plan to get your interest as lower than refinancing and selling your loan for a lower interest rate to a private lender. And then go ahead and refinance the loan to, maybe a 4% rate or something like that when your interest subsidies run out because the government finds out you're making too much money. And then you could pay your loan off. So I'm going to go back to my presentation and try to wrap it up here so we have plenty of time for questions. Just briefly, what do these numbers mean? 1 billion and 200 million. So the billion is the amount of debt that our team has advised, and the 200 million is the projected savings we've found. So, a lot of people, like I said, remember that example I showed where somebody could give away $400,000 in California by not knowing the specific state rules that you could use to pay less on your loans? There's huge savings for this stuff, particularly people that have dental school size debt. So what is Student Loan Planner? What do we do? studentloanplanner.com/help. So that URL describes our consulting service, which costs a few $100 basically. It's a one-off plan. It's a lot cheaper than financial planning. It's a one-off thing. We have follow-up plans if you need us, but that's not what I try to really sell people on because I think it's a one-time plan that you need clear guidance on, and then you can really implement most of it on your own unless you have a major life change. The refinancing deals I mentioned, so I don't think this is going to apply to most people, but if you do have private loans right now to refinance, that's a good idea. If you have private loans at an interest rate above 5%, the 30-year mortgage right now is below 3%. That's like never happened before. So you can get a lot lower interest rate. You can see fixed rates here in the 3s. So if you have a private loan, take advantage of that. I will caution you that I oftentimes will see loans that people think are private and they think they have to pay them back. These are specifically health professions loans in a lot of cases, but they're really loans that can be converted into federal loans and can be forgiven. So I see that mistake a whole lot. So just make sure you don't make that mistake because that's a $50,000 mistake and it's pretty common. In terms of there is me, I work, on Thursdays, Fridays. I run the business most of the time, but I do most of the biggest student loan consults. These are some of the other members of our team. Pretty much everybody's got an advanced credential. Really try to be really focused on really complex cases because that's where we can really save the most money. And get a plan. I mean, I'm not here to sell you on harder on anything. Like you either kind of want to figure this out on your own, listen to 10 hours of podcasts, read 10 hours worth of blog posts, and be a do-it-yourselfer because that you just want to do it that way. That's fine. If you kind of lost what I was talking about a lot, like you're still like, what the heck is this guy talking about? But that you have a lot of debt and you need help with it, studentloanplanner.com, our website. And, you can figure out, basically you can book a time with one of our consultants to get a customized plan for your specific situation. That's our email. If you have a specific question that you want to share, like you didn't want to put it on the chat, because you just don't want to be, exposing anything or any kind of information, but you want to ask our opinion on something. I'll tell you whether or not I think it's worth it to do the consult or if you should refinance, if you give me a lot of details. So, send that to help@studentloanplanner.com. And then now I'm to the questions point. I'm done with the presentation. I'm going to take your questions. Just before I do, again, those resources, the free stuff, right? Student Loan Planner podcast. You can subscribe to that, Spotify, iTunes, anywhere you listen to podcasts, just search Student Loan Planner and you'll find it. And then studentloanplanner.com/blog is all of our free posts and tools. And just to show you again for the free stuff, let's see here. I'll show you the best way to get like the free information for dentists is you go to blog and then by occupation, and then you can see dentists here. And then it's also on the side here, dentist. And if you click dentist, you'll see all kinds of stuff. Endodontist salaries, podcasts we've done, the financial crisis a lot of dentists are facing due to the COVID pandemic, oral surgeons, orthodontists. So we have a lot of stuff for people thinking about specializing, planning, financial planning for a dental practice owner, really all kinds of stuff. So that's the free stuff. And then, the podcast, you can subscribe here on any of those places. So let me, the exciting part's going to be your questions. So let me turn this screen share off. And then if you want to go ahead and post those in the chat, I will answer your questions for the amount of time we have left. Okay. Dave Ramsey, Carlson strategy, say aggressively pay your debt. So I'm not against paying off debt. Believe it or not, I'm not super against it. But kind of here's the problem. So, Dave Ramsey will talk a lot about how, you all debt is bad. You've got to pay it off. The thing is dental school debt was, a tenth of what it was 20 years ago. And why has it exploded so much? It's because all dental schools know that they can charge you as much as they want because you can pay this debt when you graduate based on a percentage of your income instead of a flat monthly payment. So if you do live on rice and beans and put all your money towards your loans, I'll tell you what I see the majority of the time happen. The debt is so large relative to your earnings that what happens, and your interest is so large that what happens is people throw, $60,000 at their $500,000 debt and they knock off $30K of it, from the interest, and they lived at their parents' house 1 year, and then they do it again for the second year, and they've knocked $500,000 down to like 425, and they still live at home. They don't have their own place. They still haven't made any more progress in their life goals, their practice goals, and they're like, "What the heck am I doing? I'm just spinning my tires in the mud." So the reason why paying off your debt really aggressively works is because, if you choose to do it, it's because of your high savings rate. So what I tell people to do instead is take all that money and invest it, put it into mutual funds, not just the stock market, but, index funds, right, at Vanguard or Betterment or Wealthfront, one of those kind of places. And then take the aggressive approach to opening a practice versus the super anti-debt approach. Because if you do the super anti-debt approach, you could easily be in a situation where you're going to have to wait for, 5 to 10 years before you're able to buy and qualify for a practice, because a practice provider is not going to approve you if you refinance to a 5-year loan payment. You're paying $10,000 a month towards your debt. None of the banks are going to give you a practice loan, and then you're stuck being somebody's associate for 10 years. So what I'll say is these anti-debt strategies, they work great for somebody that's got $20,000 or $30,000 of credit card debt. They work great for somebody that's got $100,000 of dental school debt, who's able to live at their parents' basement for 2 years and be done forever. That works great, right? That $200,000 dental school debt case that I showed, that somebody wants to live in New York, pay it off fast. That's great. That works great. But ultimately, what I see people do is try to do the debt payoff thing, get discouraged, and then stop. And then that's horrible advice. And the other thing I'd say is the anti-debt sort of experts, again, what they understand really well is credit cards, mortgages, car loans. They understand that financial product really, really well, but they have very, very little understanding of the complexity of student loans. So let's see here. Reposting. Do you ever recommend using leftover loans or parental support to invest in funds like Roth IRA, mutual fund while dental school? So if you know you're going to go for forgiveness anyway, that you shouldn't use the money towards your loans, you should use it towards investing. So this is why the student loan system is so screwed up, because the answer is yes to Jessica's question. You would take any leftover loans rather than returning it. You would literally, if you have earned earnings, right? Because you worked, a few hours a week, you have like $5,000 of taxable income a year or something. You could put the money into a Roth IRA, or you could put it into mutual funds. I like Vanguard and Betterment specifically. Those are two good companies to check out for getting started with investing. But yeah, when you have, a system where President Trump hasn't changed it at all, right? He's just sort of carried on the ability to pay a very small amount. And then you've got the other major presidential party candidate, Biden, saying, we want to reduce what you can pay to 5% of your income. Neither one of them are saying, hey, let's cap what people can borrow and make them all pay it back. I mean, and the realistic reason is because that's not possible without crashing the economy because of how big, student loans have gotten. And again, if I didn't show you the net worth part of my calculator. I probably should show you that real quick just so that you know it exists. So if I share that, so the last part of this, we'll do this scenario where the person is 500,000 of debt, and we'll say the person's single, and we'll say that their growth rate of their income instead of 15% is like 5%. So 180,000 topping out with their income. So can this person ever retire? Oh my gosh, 500K of debt, right? And then 180K terminal income. That's not great, right? But watch this. So in this column, this is the last spreadsheet here. If they save 15% of their income to loans and investments, this person's going to work for 40 years. That's how long their required working career has to be. So that's really a long time, right? Now, what this is assuming is, okay, say you can get 5% investing, you're going to live on 100K when you retire, and we'll say you're doing the pay program. Okay, it doesn't really matter that much, but we'll say the pay program, I guess. Are you using loan forgiveness with PSLF? No, you're doing private practice loan forgiveness, and we'll say you've got nothing saved. So this column is what matters. So this is your income. I'm going through this really fast. I usually have an hour to go through somebody's like specific personal situation, which is why why we have the service, right? But basically this is your income over time. This is your debt. This is how much money you're investing or putting away into assets. So this is like probably about $1,000 a month into investments, and that's all you're doing. And then this is your total assets, and this is your total debt, and then this would be your total net worth. So you'll notice that this net worth is not positive until the loans are forgiven. And then when the loans are forgiven, your assets, and I'll highlight this, your assets actually fall, right? Because you're paying the tax bomb, and then your debt goes away to zero. So your debt goes to zero because the loans are forgiven, and then your net worth takes this huge swing. And then if I look at how much money you can live off of when you're not able to work anymore, basically what you're looking for is, when do you hit 100,000 of taxable income, or you basically income from your investments in this column. So I'm looking here for $100,000, and then this happens in, it looks like 2062, which is I get 42 years. Okay. So what happens if I increase my savings rate? If I increase it to 30%, watch how much 42 years falls by. So it falls from 42 years to 29 years. So that's pretty cool. And then I'm going to change this to a 20-year plan so I can show you that. So 29 years, if you basically, instead of putting in almost nothing to investments, if you max out your retirement accounts and put a couple thousand into investments, suddenly you're having a really nice retirement age, despite the fact that you're only making 180,000 with 500,000 dental school debt. Now, if you become a practice owner, let's say you buy a $600,000 dental practice. Well, every year you're going to pay down 60K of that practice loan, and that's going to raise your wealth by $60,000 every year. So if that's going to bump up this amount of asset growth substantially. So to model that, I'm just going to say 50% savings rate, just to kind of model the impact of an extra huge chunk of asset growth. Okay. And if I do that, then your years until retirement is 20 instead of 42. So you cut your working career by half because of your savings rate. Now, what if you refinanced? If I change this to refinancing, you're going to notice that repay becomes 23 years with refinancing, because more of your money is going into your loans over a 20-year repayment period. It's a little difficult to model this with a more aggressive repayment period because you have to account for not having enough cash flow for the first year. But basically, if you put 60,000 away, it's still about 23 years. If you did like a Dave Ramsey, sort of plan and paid it back in 5 years, let's assume you're borrowing are earning somehow an extra, about amount of money basically to be able to pay $107,000 a year towards your loans, you're still 3 years retiring 3 years later than if you had done the repay plan. So one thing that I'll say is, and I'll put it back to the 10-year plan here. One thing that I'll say is 23 years is way better than a 15% savings rate with repay doing 40 years or 42 years, right? So 42 is worse. 42 is worse than 23. So a lot of times what'll happen is, like a Dave Ramsey will say, well, you need to pay back all your loans. Well, it's because a lot of people don't have the discipline to become a practice owner and invest and open a brokerage account and put money into retirement. A lot of people just don't have that discipline. And so the emotional, really easy answer is just giddy up, just pay off all your loans, because it's really easy. It fits on a bumper sticker, right? It's not a strategy where you have to do a lot of thinking. It just intuitively feels good and makes sense. And so the thing is yeah, if you're comparing a 50% savings rate, paying off all your debt, to a loan forgiveness strategy, saving and investing not a lot, then yeah, paying off all your debt will be better. But if you, within the same strategy at the same savings level, it's much, much better to do the cheapest plan. So that's just kind of an explanation of that last part, that I cover during our consults, basically showing how even if you're not one of these, 300K earners, if that's not your goal with your career, that's totally fine. And also, if you're not wanting to live on rice and beans, that's also totally fine. You can simply just try to put away the maximum into your 401k and an extra $1,000 a month on the side investing, and even be an associate for 30 years, and you can still retire in 30 years if you have a clear plan. So you don't have to live your life with the bumper sticker financial plan strategy. I'm not saying don't do that, because for some people, that is what makes them excited to go, save that money instead of to go spend it on Disney World, which I guess isn't a problem really right now, for most people, but you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, yeah, if your choices are spend the money or put it towards your loans, well, sure. But I'm saying if you have the option of putting it towards investments versus putting it towards your loans, that's the real fair comparison. And it's one that kind of shows more detail why the more sort of straightforward pay off your loans plan is not always the right strategy. I don't want to make it seem like I'm saying forgiveness or bust. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying you have to use math to figure out what the right strategy is, and you can't just use pure emotion to figure it out. So let me go back to the questions. Okay, so let's see, chat. How can we commit to one of these 20-year plans? Great question. The answer is you don't have to commit to it. You simply need to figure out, with the probability of what you want your future career to be, which one do I need to do? Which one gives me the best, path, just in case it does go away. So, for example, if you're really freaked out that one of these plans is going to go away, then I would tell you, well, sign up for the repay plan, because that's going to keep your interest down. And if you ever want to opt out of it, you can, and the balance grew at a simple rate of interest. So if you can't beat 3% interest, which is the rate after the subsidy, basically in some cases, then you're doing something wrong, right? So again, you're not committing to one of these 20-year plans in stone. It's simply like, we'll figure out what you're not comparing, have no debt versus commit to one of these forgiveness plans. You've already made that decision, having the debt, right? You're really committing to, do I try to get aggressive with this debt, which is a huge commitment, because then that money's not going away into investments or savings or buying a house or starting a practice, right? Versus, what's the best path with the money? So I'll say that the IBR plan is an act of Congress. It's not going anywhere. The only plans really that have been proposed, with the exception of the 2017 Prosper Act, have been more generous, not less generous. Also, the Republican plans have been more generous as of late, in the sense that the Republican Senate proposed a bill a couple of years ago, before COVID, that would allow people to pay 10% on their student loans from their payroll, which is a huge deal, because most dentists could use that as a loophole to pay a lot less than what people are paying now, and they would eliminate the tax bomb. So when the Republican Senate is saying, hey, let's eliminate the tax bomb, and let's allow people to pay out of their payroll rather than based on their tax returns, which are sometimes a lot higher for dentists. That's showing me that these things, it's really trending towards, heavily subsidized loans. And I think what'll happen eventually is the Congress will realize how stupid of a decision they made making the student loan rules this way. And I think they'll cap it, what you can borrow eventually, to no more than a certain amount. But I think that we're many years away from that. And it's not going to affect people that currently have the debt out. They'll only apply it to future borrowers. Let's say you're taking a job with another dentist. How do you recommend a job negotiated 1099? Are the ways to hide income? So 1099, you can set up a SEP IRA. So I can go into this a lot more if you know, with the one-on-one consults. But like basically, if you're a 1099, that means you're an independent contractor, which means that you're not technically that person's employee. So that means you're technically a small business owner and you're the sole proprietor, if you will. So that means you can take deductions for things like you have to talk to your CPA, right? But you know, I have to throw out that disclaimer because I'm not a CPA. But you have to look at, you know, mileage deductions. You can look at setting up a SEP IRA, which gives you a lot bigger deductions for retirement than an employee typically has. So you can really get that AGI low and get your payment a lot lower. How does student loan, expand on how student loan forgiveness works? So again, you pay for 10% of your income for 20 to 25 years. And then at the end, the loans are forgiven. And then under current rules, you have to pay income taxes on that forgiven balance when it's forgiven. So you have to pay, you know, 40%, let's say, on some large forgiven balance. Is it better to file taxes separately if your spouse has a significant income? So I would say in general, if they have no student loans and the spouse has a significant income, yes, it's generally better to file separately. But, you know, if you have a complex situation, you know, I would be doing you a disservice to not tell you that you should get it looked at by us or someone else, or do the time on your own to research it, because if you file separately, you can cause yourself large penalties. So again, with this Excel spreadsheet, so if I take somebody who's making, you know, let's say you're making 120,000 and your spouse works in, you know, let's say finance or something, right? And they're making a ton of money, 500,000 a year. So the tax penalty from that, you're paying an extra 10 grand per year in income taxes by filing separately. But if you file jointly, and I'll just put on 500,000 here just to show you. So 500,000 of income, and the difference is of your loan payment is 5,000 a month versus basically 1,000 a month, or a little under that. So that's a $4,000 per month difference. And the thing is the cool part is right now you can generally get out of this $10,000 tax penalty by just amending your taxes. So you can go back once the tax return has been used for a year, and you can actually amend tax returns up to 3 years in the past. So it's pretty complicated, but you can get around the tax penalty and exclude your spouse's income generally. So that's an example of how this stuff is really kind of pretty individualized. Couple more chats, and I think we'll call it because we're at the hour. And yeah, I guess that was the last question. Does anybody we'll take maybe one or two more questions. And I'll type this in here. Studentloanplanner.com is our website if you want to check that out. So I guess if we don't have any more questions, I will stop my screen share here. Thank you so much, everyone, for having me. Again, encouraging you to download that Excel spreadsheet. Just go to the site; it'll be pretty obvious to download it. But yeah, I wish all of you good success on your careers. It's going to be really stressful, you know. But it's stressful for everybody, and you'll figure it out. You'll get through it. And remember that your student debt is a tax. So worst case scenario, right? Take your dental incomes and take away 10% of that for your loans. That net income. So let's say 120,000 minus 12,000 for a 10% tax. So let's say your net income graduating is 108,000, you know, as an associate. That income's a lot better than what you'd get as somebody with a bachelor's degree. So that's telling you that even if you have $500,000 of dental school debt, and some days you're kind of look at yourself in the mirror and you're like, what did I do? You still made a decent, good decision financially. So that's one thing I can tell you to make everybody, you know, really happy, is that, you know, no matter what your situation is, I promise you, there's definitely a path to a fantastic financial future. So don't despair. Just know the terrible loopholes. That's my takeaway message. So Ali, I guess for the hosts, Peter and Michelle and everyone, thank you for hosting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was great. I learned so much. So thank you.
Yeah. So some people that's enough, but you know, again, if you do want to get a custom plan, studentloanplanner.com. It's for most dental students, it's going to be probably most of people will have more than 400,000. So most people would probably end up working with me. It's about $600.
Okay, thank you, Travis.
Thank you.
Yeah, if we have any questions.
Yep. Take care and stay safe.
You too. Thank
All
you.
right. Bye.
Bye.